Howdy y'all, welcome back to another mining tutorial. Sort of. This is part 1 of at least a 2-parter on self-sustaining ships. In the tutorials for self-sustaining ships, I'll be going from start to finish rather than from general to specific as I usually do, although they tend to work out about the same. It is much easier to explain the process this way though, as so little of this information can be generalized. I will be referring to the Infinity a lot in these tutorials, so if you've missed a couple of episodes or have forgotten, the Infinity is a Grand Tour self-sustaining ship that I've built to do a lap of the Kerbal system for Kerbalcast. To start out, before you even enter the vehicle assembly building or the spaceplane hangar, you need to know what kind of mission you're going to be performing. While self-sustaining ships are amazing, they aren't necessary for every mission. If you're only going to the Mun and back, you probably don't need to bother. Going outside of Kerbin's sphere of influence doesn't mean you need one either. Transferring to Duna or Eve is relatively fuel cheap, as is the return trip. Making multiple stops along your trip, though, is where a self-sustaining ship starts to become helpful. Being able to hit up Duna, then Eve, then Moho before returning to Kerbin is much easier in a ship that can resupply along the way. Even at this point, though, you still need to consider what you're doing. The Infinity is just going along to plant flags. I don't need to worry about science equipment, satellites for contracts, or rovers for surface exploration. If you're doing this in career or science mode, you'll need to consider these things as well, and build an appropriate ship for the mission. This makes a big difference to the ship type and design philosophy that you'll use. This ship, more than any other that I can think of, will succeed or fail based on how well you plan out your mission and your design strategy. After you've established your mission parameters, the next thing you need to decide is what type of craft you want. Biff has talked previously about trying this out with a big multi-part ship, then whittling his way down to a single vessel that does all the work. Well, as with anything else, there are pros and cons to each design philosophy. There are 3 main types of ship designs you'll be using for self-sustaining ships. The first is the single ship design. In this design, you have one ship that you fly the entire time. It lands, mines, refines, and then flies to the next destination. This design is the most simple of all and benefits from being overall the lightest ship for interplanetary travel of the 3. It also excels at missions that involve stopping at multiple bodies in the same sphere of influence. It does have a few problems though. You're constrained by your own size. You can't be too big, otherwise you can't land and will be fuel inefficient or underpowered or both. Yet you can't be too small, otherwise you won't have enough delta V to make transfers. You may also have problems landing on bodies with high gravity. In general, 50 tons is a good size to aim for with this type of craft. This is actually the rough size of the Devourer, which is the mining lander for the Infinity. The next type is what I like to call the Apollo style. It's a fairly flexible design that is in 2 pieces, the first being in the lander and the other the orbiter. These vessels have much better fuel storage capabilities than the single ship vessel and have the ability to more easily serve multiple roles. For example, the orbiter can contain most of the fuel and heavy equipment such as the ISRU, batteries, etc., while the lander can carry drills and science equipment. You can utilize either standard drive or polar drive configurations with the Apollo, which we'll get to later on, and you can carry a larger crew for a more fun adventure. The Apollo doesn't have many drawbacks. Really the only one that comes to mind is that if something happens to either module, you're done for, since they operate essentially as 2 halves of a whole. I'd say these average 100 tons or so, but depending on what you do, that could vary quite a bit. Finally, we have the Mothership design, which is what the Infinity is. These will be at least 3 modules most of the time, since their size necessitates a polar drive configuration, but it could conceivably be built into 2 modules. You also, of course, could use more than 3, but to me at least, 3 makes the most sense. The key strength and weakness of this design is that it serves as a mothership. You will have multiple vessels docked to it that do all of the work save for propulsion. This is a positive, since you can specialize or bring up backup craft with you. But it's also a negative though, as it adds build complexity, cost, and time to your design. These vessels do tend to be quite heavy as well, so even though you're carrying around what seems like an infinite supply of fuel, you still don't get very good gas mileage, and you certainly won't get a lot of speed. Still, in my opinion, for a true Grand Tour mission, there's no better craft type to use. Also, as an added benefit, these crafts serve as excellent bases of operations, or for colony fleets if you use mods, as they double as huge transport and storage vessels by default. After you've decided where to go and what ship type to build, well, where do you go from there? The basics for all designs are really a lot of the basics that I've covered up to this point so far. You need to have at least one way to scan for ore, at least one drill, at least one ISRU, and at least one ore storage tank. Then if you're using a multiple module vessel design, it's a good idea to have a module specifically for fuel storage. Added ore storage doesn't hurt either, as the more ore you take with you means the more fuel you can refine. While mass-wise, a full large ore tank weighs about the same as a full Rokamax X200, or half of the orange fuel tanks if you don't know what that tank is right off the top of your head. It's not as big volume-wise. That means you can take more fuel with you in the ore tanks than you can by taking a regular fuel tank. Still though, it's important to have storage for both. You also will need general things you'd need for any other vessel or station: power, RCS, reaction wheels, and then other equipment as your mission dictates. For the single ship design, it's actually pretty easy to build a self-sustaining ship using just these general tips. If you re-listen to my 4th mining tutorial where I describe different mining landers, the all-in-one lander is a great design to use for this as a base. Just make it bigger than I described with more fuel and ore storage. Really, these tips barely scratch the surface of the design of these vessels, but I don't want to go in for too long this time. So, next time in part 2 of our self-sustaining ship tutorial, we'll really dig into the design of the multi-part versions of these ships, discussing at length ore storage versus fuel storage, drive configurations, and many more tiny details that can really make or break the designs of these complex craft. Also, like I mentioned in my progress report, feel free to ask me any questions that you'd like on Twitter at JMA4707. There's a lot to cover with self-sustaining ships, and while I hope to hit all of it, I may miss something that you want to know. I'll gladly stick it in the tutorials, as well as respond to you with an answer. Until next time, J. Arthur, signing off.